Hello, everyone. Hopefully this one's working and that one's working as well.
Test.
Yeah, perfect. Great. Hi, I'm Steve King. I'm the Director of Business Impact at Atlassian for the Atlassian Foundation. I'm very excited to actually be doing this talk, talking about social impact and how organizations can actually start to work towards that. I just want to start by thanking my panel guests to come along. Nicole Forrester from Fujitsu, Aubrey Blanche from Culture Amp, and Eli Velasquez from Investors of Color. Today, we're going to talk about how we can think about more than the outcomes of the work that we do in terms of the product, the services. Atlassian's a SaaS company, and how we can actually utilize not just our way of working and the work that we do and the products that we actually produce to go create social impact through the philanthropy work that we do, but how integrated we can actually make social impact into the decisions we make as a day-to-day basis, how we lead the company, how we shape the company, and how we move things forward. And literally how every company in some way can start to have impact in communities and in the culture around them. So I might lead off with the easiest question of all, of course. When we talk about social impact and the desire to actually have change and kind of connect with and make change in the communities around us, I think everyone agrees that there is a lot of change that is needed and that we all need to be doing something. And as a panel, we actually discussed before, we don't want to leave this room today having just talked a lot about the problems that we see and the opportunities that are there, but to bring some tangible opportunity to it. So if everyone is talking about it and accepting it, why aren't more people doing at least something towards impact? And so the easiest question of all to start with, I might start with you, Nikki, is where do we start as a company in leading the way on social impact?
I would say start with your why. So I represent Fujitsu. So we're a Japanese headquartered global technology company. We're a systems integrator. So we do lots of different things with many partners. And one of the things that we did when we got a new CEO in 2019 was come up with a purpose statement. Our purpose statement is our why. And I think this is a really good way for people to understand what it is their organisation wants to shift the needle on. So I'll share our purpose statement is to make the world more sustainable by building trust in society through innovation. And the reason I call that out is because the power of three, it's easy for me to remember. But also because when I think about how you translate your why through to action, you also have to think about your what. So coming out of our purpose statement, we developed our what, and we continue to iterate that because we're growing and we're changing. And so our what currently is to be a technology company that has a net positive impact. So this is our business strategy. And then it's down to the how. So we know our why is our purpose, our what is this vision statement, and our how is how we incorporate this into BAU every day in our business.
Yeah, I love that. With the work that has to happen in social impact or kind of across the board, I have talked a little bit about communities and kind of the people that are impacted by decisions or things like climate change, for example. I guess how do you bring more of that into the conversation internally, and how do you actually bring that to bear in your why or in your mission statement, for example?
I think our approach to bringing it in internally is really helping our people connect and helping our people recognise that in every decision we make inside our organisation every day, there's an opportunity to have impact by linking back to our why, but also recognising that we can't do this on our own. We're not siloed. We as an organisation have partners and alliances and organisations that we work very closely with, and we actually need to invest in an ecosystem and support that ecosystem. And that's done really about heart and mindset. Like you come to the discussion with our view, our why is that we want to have this net positive impact, and how do we collaborate with others, learn from others, share share with others, but we do that in a way that is heading towards systematized. We're not there yet, but that our purpose actually sits in the way that we make our decisions about our business every day and how we partner and how we collaborate and support and invest in the ecosystem.
Yeah, that's great. Eli, I might pass to you. In building out an ecosystem around, communities and trying to bring change about, what are some of the important things that you are building and the challenges that you're seeing in those in building out that ecosystem and building that connection?
So when we built Investors of Color, it's a national network of underrepresented investors in the U.S. We represent about 800 different individuals and organizations across the whole capital stack, from individual high net worth individuals all the way to athletes, entertainers, and everything in between. We looked at the statistics, and I always say we're on the wrong side of the 1%. So less than 3% of venture capital goes to people of color. In the last 10 years, 0.006% has gone to black women. The fact that you have to start with a zero that's the why. And so when we started building this work, we had to understand where are those high net worth individuals and how do we engage them into this high risk, high reward asset class. So that was the main driver in how we built out Investors of Color, trying to do a lot of customer discovery. And so really going out into the community, really connecting with them, understanding what their needs are, and then building the trust to understand where are you actually, do you have access to capital? Do you yourself have capital? And are you able to mobilize that capital into this asset class? So that took us about 3 years worth of work. We did it in stealth mode and really trying to build out that whole ecosystem. And I just found another, and they're just everywhere, right? But it's just one step. It's a full contact sport, right? One person at a time, and then building the value systems of what we're trying to accomplish. Ultimately, what we want to do is build generational wealth, right? And so that those individuals that get funded, yes, it's great, but ultimately we also would want to generate returns for our investors and then keep that cycle going.
As a broader ecosystem, and we've been talking about a lot of entrepreneurs and startups, obviously, in this Congress, but it'd be really interesting to think of how they can start to implement decisions around bringing some of that community or that kind of value to that ecosystem. With your founders, what are the things that you would see a good or crossover with the investors that you're working with? Where are they seeing the highest kind of points of relationship building?
So here's the irony. With Investors of Color, we are not exclusive to only investing in funders of color. And many times people said, oh, you're Investors of Color. Let me send you the deal that looks like you. And I said, no. I want access to the best deals. Because if you're in on that deal, I want access to that. And so over time, what we found is that we started getting access to not only those deals, but also deals that look like people like us. So we got this really nice mix, but it really took a lot of effort to build those relationships at that next level. So the top VC groups who want to diversify the cap table, I'm cool with that. Send me the deal, we'll get it funded, right? Ultimately, what we're looking for is that access point. And at the end of the day, what we had to make a decision with Investors of Color is that we can't serve two masters. So I can't work with every founder to get them investor ready. And so ultimately my customer is the investor. And I want to ensure that every day that I go out, I'm maximizing value for the investor. So as you're looking at your communities or your ecosystems, you can't boil the ocean, right? So you have to figure out who's our primary customer and serve them well, right? And then really build out whatever you need to build out from a value-based system around that customer.
Yeah, it's interesting around problem owners. I think there's been a lot of conversation this week so far, the last 2 days, around people who are closest to the problem being the best to find the solutions for it and either adapt or innovate around that challenge. And maybe I'll pass to you, Aubrey, as we talk about bringing that culture of change and social impact into an organization, there's a load of startups and early stage companies that have no idea what to do or what's valuable and what's tokenistic. Where does a company start, and how can they actually benefit when they're talking about implementing decisions for these social changes?
Yeah, so I think, over the last sort of 2 years, I've helped build the social impact program at Culture Amp. And one of the things we really wanted to avoid was deciding which problems we were willing to solve. Because, right, it's this very idea that it feels good to me to solve this problem for you, but one that may not be the most pressing problem a community faces. And your solution is probably wrong if you don't have the lived experience to deeply understand the context. And so we spent a lot of time listening, and we were very clear with communities that we were speaking to what our mission and what our why was. So at Culture Amp, our sort of corporate mission is to build a better world of work. And our social impact thesis extends that to say, and to make it more attainable. And so I think that was a really important part of it, is one, deciding what we will and will not focus on from a topic point of view. And so for us, access to fair work and economic opportunity is really our driver. And then we ask the question, who lacks that economic opportunity the most, and how do we create opportunities to listen to them about what's most needed as articulated by them? And then we try to find vectors to give to them in ways that maximize their decision-making rights with the resources we're providing. So I'll give you a couple of tangible examples. We are, please don't tweet this, the PR team will kill me. We are officially launching our foundation in just a couple of weeks, and our first grantee is an Indigenous organization. And one of the aspects of it's a small financial commitment in addition to what we call wraparound services, so free software, free consulting. But the financial gift was very specifically provided as an operating grant rather than a program-based grant. And that sounds a little in the weeds for social impact, but the idea was we wanted it to go to whatever the organization deemed important, not a program we felt good about funding. And if you know anything about the philanthropy industrial complex, similar to VC, the overwhelming majority of money goes to white-run organizations, and the majority of that money goes towards program-based financial gifts. And so what we heard when we talked to our our philanthropic partners was that they said, we just need cash to run our servers. And that's not a very sexy thing to fund, but we can do these things if we have the resources to do that. And so we decided to take this very operational, almost boring approach to what we're supporting, but that's because what we were told the need was. Or, we're looking at, we have a lot of high skill tech, legal, HR, marketing, communications folks, and we're looking at providing those services to our nonprofit partners. So we pay the marketing professional for the day to do the marketing for the organization. And because those are the resources we had. But I think it all comes down to, we got all of those ideas because we were told that was what was needed. And then we looked internally and said, which of these needs can we meet? The last thing I would say is be really clear about what you can't offer upfront. Right. So not every organization can offer everything, and that's not a problem, but be clear about what problems you can solve, and then trust the communities to use your resources to solve them.
Yeah. And that idea of, yes, you can give $1 and you can give a day of time or an hour of time, and one plus the other is not actually just the sum of those parts, right? It's that classic, this is actually an amplifying effect of, we give you money, we give you access, we give you skill, and we transfer that down, and that's a good opportunity. You also touched on this idea of active philanthropy or social impact versus that kind of idea of passive impact. And I want to talk about that for a second. So when you have a company like Atlassian, we get in the press a little bit about our founders talking a lot about the climate. And interestingly, our philanthropy focus is not climate, but people don't know that. They think it is. But there's a lot of things that as a company we've started doing to make better decisions around the climate and around the future for the future generations. And they're decisions that actually any company can make. They're not things that we've actively invested in with funding, but we're showing that actually these are really important decisions to make. you need to become net zero, you need to move towards more sustainable practices and things like that. I guess passing it back to you briefly, apart from just giving money or making a donation, what are the other things that companies, both big and small, can start to do in terms of driving towards the impact that they care about?
Yeah, so I think one of the things, you said this so beautifully, but there's an idea of like community and ecosystem impact. And so I think that sharing in, and I'll talk about what I mean by appropriate, but sharing in an appropriate way what you're doing to role model, I think can be inspiring to other companies. I am guilty of having worked at Atlassian with Steve in a past life. And one of the things I really appreciate about the climate work they do is that they kind of open source it. And so they demystify, like it can be terrifying for a company to go on the sustainability journey. But if you see, actually, yeah, Atlassian's a big fancy company with big budgets, but a lot of the decisions they make weren't that expensive or complicated, it becomes easier. And so that would be something that I think is important, is in community forums, in things like that, share the steps you're taking and what you're learning. In the philanthropy space, I talked about listening, but I also want to couch that, like, if nonprofits or charities have to explain their problems 100,000 times, that's a huge drain on resources. But if you've done that listening and you can pass that on to someone who can learn from the education that you got, I think that that's incredibly powerful. The other thing I would say about communicating is be generous with sharing your failures. So having come up in diversity, equity, and inclusion, you would be amazed how every company is equitable and inclusive, right? We've read their careers pages. But I find it really, really difficult to get my peers to talk about the things that they failed to do. And I can tell you, as someone who has led that function, I have failed a lot because it turns out that structural racism is a little bit pernicious. And so I would also encourage that is talk about what didn't work and understand the context of why that decision or initiative didn't work. I think that we often hold ourselves to impossible standards of perfect impact. And I think we actually collectively are held back by not creating space for learning and growth in these topics. It doesn't mean that we should be careful not to do harm, but I think that a lot of times we don't share our failures, so we often repeat each other's failures. And so I think you don't need to put that on your website, but I think in forums like this, or if you're, sitting at lunch with someone, asking them, what do you wish you had known sooner when you were doing X, can be a really powerful thing.
Please.
No, go you first.
You go. Can I just jump in because on the program only speaking Nicole Forrester instead of speakers, so would these other two speakers introduce themselves to the company?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Sure. Very quickly. Hey, I'm Aubrey Blanche-Seriano. I lead social impact, sustainability, and equity at Culture Amp.
And I'm Eli Velasquez, co-founder and managing partner of Investors of Color. So when we started Investors of Color, we started in stealth mode in 2018, like I mentioned, but we didn't come out and formally found it until 2020, and then George Floyd was murdered. And you will not believe how many organizations said, you should form a nonprofit. And I said, why? We're a group of accredited investors seeking to make equity investments in exchange for return. You should be a nonprofit that we can give you money. I said, I'm not a charity. I'm not a charity. If you want to make an investment into my fund or my syndicate, I'm happy to accept that. So it was interesting when you're thinking about, then this emergence, and I was talking to Phil Gaskin from Kaufman earlier. We're talking about how all these corporates came out, right, in the U.S., pledged estimates about $75 billion towards racial equity, racial justice. Only about 400 million actually left the door, right? So there was this massive disconnect, and people said, well, DEI equals charity. And I said, no, DEI equals opportunity, right? And this is what we were trying to get through, and this is what the work that we continue to try to get through as we're building those relationships, especially at the corporate level.
When you see failure as an opportunity, you can be less afraid. So one of the things that we spend a lot of time doing, I know I spend a lot of time doing, is helping adjust misperceptions of risk. And one way that people and organisations choose not to move forward is by not making decisions. So no decision is a decision. And this idea that we admire this problem, so I'll talk about First Nations inequity in Australia as a lived experience of mine. And I see that often people admire the problem and say, yes, this is very bad and we should do something, but then don't move on to the doing of something. And often this misperception of risk, as well as this, I don't know how, we don't know how. How will it work? I'm not being political because I'm not talking about The Voice, which is probably what you're thinking I'm talking about. I'm actually talking about a really simple project that we were able to get off the ground when we listened, when we collaborated, when we said we don't know the answers to how it will work, but we come with a heart of trust, and we will start with you where you are, with you being the community, this rural Aboriginal community, and we will meet you where you are because we have empathy as a central value of the way we operate, and we will move at the pace of trust. So we will not say, here is what we want to do and this is what you need. We will listen and we will co-create because we see the opportunity. And we aspire to support and to bring to bear the resources, the considerable multinational resources that we have available to us for you to live your aspirations. We will help lift together through co-creation. And these are what we call our trust principles. And this is how we move past the fear of failure and the idea of risk, and that if we invest in a commercial model in a First Nations community to provide a service to one of our customers, we are not doing that as a charitable, it's a conscious business decision.
I want to touch on that because I think that trust element is a hard one, because if people see you as a leader in a space, the assumption is that, they trust you, they trust what you're going to say, and you're always right. But the reality to that is that if you're willing to stand up and talk about something and be a voice of something, you need to be ready to be wrong. And that's how you actually build trust, is kind of admitting that you're wrong, or kind of sharing that. And I want to talk about two things here. One is on the failure side, obviously sharing feedback, and being able to say, look, we tried a thing, we had the best of intentions, but actually we got a really bad feedback about that, bad juju or whatever it was. But the reality of that is that we don't share that outside the organization, and I made the comment yesterday with somebody that imagine if everyone in your industry shared all of your customer feedback with everyone else in your industry, right? Like, we'd have incredible products. We'd advance humanity and all the things we're trying to do very quickly. And what we really want in social impact and what we strive for is that we're trying to share that feedback. A piece that we got on the help side is that we got told, hey, we don't know how to ask you for help because every time you say, you want to help us, you try and explain what your products do. And that's confusing, and we just want money. So that's what we ask for. We want money. And we started sharing this around with a few other foundations and got a lot of feedback saying, we get the same thing. Like, they don't understand what we're doing. And we've now realized, like, this pairing between what we're trying to achieve and what they're trying to achieve is really critical in building that relationship of trust and kind of sharing that experience. With that, I kind of want to pass back to you, Aubrey, and talk about how do you not just demonstrate that trust and start to actually move forward with it, but how do you start to make decisions that exemplify that, I guess, in a sense, that courage of saying, we might be wrong, but we might not have time to react unless we start doing something now. So how do you start to see that roll out inside an organization when you're trying to have impact?
Yeah, so I'll talk about because I feel like if I just told you to talk about failure, I should start. So I'll talk about, being at two different organizations, and something I really failed pretty critically at in one organization that I fixed in the next one. So one of the things that really matters to me is being very intentional about building anti-racist, programs, practices into the work that I do. And I try to be very thoughtful, especially about thinking about anti-Black racism specifically, because if you just say racism, you forget Black people, they get left behind. You have to be very clear about the particular manifestation. And in one role, I was looking to begin to build a program that could better the experiences of Black employees. And so we started with listening. And we did a listening session with those employees and a senior leader. And the thing I didn't do was build the accountability structures for the loop back. So the employees found it cathartic. They appreciated that the leader was listening, but then I didn't build in those checkpoints with that leader and also with the leaders surrounding that leader to make sure that the programs had the visibility and support they needed. And so they were eventually sort of left by the wayside. And the reason I share that is because as someone who is leading the initiative, it's on me to have done that more correctly. And what that resulted in was a breakdown of trust, because people shared their vulnerable and most intimate stories of oppression and exclusion and harm and difficulty with a white leader who I absolutely believe cared and had the right intention, but didn't have the mechanisms around them to maintain focus and show up in line with that intention, right? And in my job, I was the accountability partner. And so coming into a new organization, I happened to start at Culture Amp just a couple months before George Floyd, when, the entire United States cared about Black people for 3.7 minutes. And one thing that we did was we did have, again, that listening session with Black employees and senior leadership. But in addition to that listening session, there was 6 months of educational programming rolled out to the senior leadership team. So they not only could take those stories that they now had, but actually have a contextual analysis of the systemic causes of those experiences they now more fully understood. And what we actually did was then we built a communications and reporting mechanism underneath that learning so that employees and leaders were given updates roughly every 30 days on the progress of the overall program. So not only leaders could know when they're falling behind, because nothing gets corporate leaders like a little friendly social justice competition. But then also it meant that employees could see that their feedback went somewhere and they had the ability to hold the organization accountable for achieving the commitments that it made. And the difference was in the previous organization, there was no movement in terms of Black experience or representation for the most part. And I'll speak in the US context because that's where we have the most employees of African descent. From 2020, where we were at about 1.7% Black, today we're at about 11.6% Black, with still gaps in our senior leadership, but we've seen significant promotions into those mid-senior levels over those last 3 years. So I talk about that as it's not just about the intention and about the listening, but what accountability structures are you building to make sure that that intention is actually operationalized?
I love that. And building back to the point on sharing that out, I think that's something that, through your Pledge 1% membership in Culture Amp, I'm not going to plug that too hard, but we have a model where we have open source the way that we approach philanthropy as well. And now with climate, and we're seeing a lot more DEI initiatives and social impacting initiatives actually start to open source their how, because the why is common, everyone shares that. The how is hard, and we don't want to relearn things because that's, kind of slowing us all down. So maybe I'll pass it back to you, Nicole. You've talked about implementing one of the programs out in an Indigenous community. Tell us a little bit about how you actually, not just, I think you've shared with me, not just how you actually approached the project, but how you then eventually handed back that IP and that how to that community to let them kind of do what they wanted with it.
And it wasn't so much a handing back, but actually a design principle from the front end, which I think is really important because self-determination for First Nations people is the key to our intergenerational wealth exchange, and having that at the front and centre of our design principle for going into the collaboration, I think really allowed us to really open ourselves to the infinity of thinking of what was possible and doing something that we had never done before and we hadn't heard about anybody else doing before. So I'll give you the hopefully quick, because it's a little bit, it's a bit of a yarn, as we would say. So there's a community 3.5 hours northwest of Brisbane on the traditional Waka Waka country. The community is called Cherbourg. Cherbourg was incorporated in 1904 as a mission, and the Queensland government forcibly removed Aboriginal people from across the state and dumped them, literally dumped lots of different groups, language groups of people, nations, on the mission in Cherbourg. And I point to that historical context as the beginning of the story of our engagement in Fujitsu with the Cherbourg community, because it was important for us to embed truth-telling internally into how we took an approach of our people to engaging with this community, to make it safe for the community to be with us on this journey. And fast forward to 2021, a Queensland State Government official whose entire mandate is to help create intergenerational wealth exchange among First Nations communities by supporting entrepreneurs. What a great job he's got. Reached out to me and said, we've had this idea about building a First Nations owned, run and managed digital service centre. Now, that's code for IT help desk, just so that everyone's clear. On a remote First Nations community in Queensland, and we want to partner with Fujitsu. Well, we want to have a conversation about partnering with Fujitsu because they needed to check us out, and the community needed to check us out. And very quickly, we, Fujitsu, saw how this lined up with our why and our what, and we didn't know the how. We'd never opened an IT help desk in a remote First Nations community before, but we knew that we knew how to run IT help desk because we do it all day, every day for our customers all over the world. So we had this IP, we had the equipment, we had the know-how, and basically we said, we're going to bring that to the table to you and we're going to hand it over at no cost, right? So we entered, so our philanthropic piece of this was we helped set up with the community, and I say with because it's a community-owned, run, managed organisation, but we handed over our know-how as well as, equipment. And we brought along with us our customer. So our customers' calls that used to be answered by Fujitsu help desk people, and they could have been in Australia, they could have been offshore. So, we have IT help desks in Manila, for example, are now being answered in Cherbourg 18 months on, because it's a self-determined enterprise of its own being. It has now attracted 3 other customers, not Fujitsu, and is answering their calls. But even better than that, it's not just doing level 1 help desk password resets anymore. They're now doing business application testing for a different customer and earning money, proper wages, on community with a commercially viable business that is reinvesting their profits back into their community.
Love that. I want to change, as we head to kind of the close of the chat, I just kind of want to change things up a little bit. We promised at the start that we wouldn't leave the room without something tangible to do. And I think that's a really great example of where other organizations can partner with existing organizations that are having impact or where that investment has been made. As we all kind of step out of here as ecosystem leaders and collaborators and kind of exemplars for startups and entrepreneurs in general, what should we be doing as a community for the up and coming entrepreneur community to help move social impact, whether it's climate, whether it's cultural, forward in a significant way?
Yeah. So find 30 companies over the next 3 to 5 years. Why 30? Because that's a portfolio that'll help you generate a return. And if you can't do it yourself, do it with other people, aggregate them, and then write the damn check. You have to write the check. If you're not writing checks, then the founder's just stuck, right? And so you can talk about it all day long, and that's what I do with my investors. We can talk about it, but it's not until that money leaves your hands, that's when you know it's real, right? And so when you're writing those checks consistently, and you don't have to be super wealthy, you don't have to be accredited, at least not in the US. You can enter through crowdfunding, you can enter through equity, you can enter through philanthropy. Philanthropy is also a form of investment, right? But you got to start writing checks. Get yourself in the process of doing that. And as you build that investor muscle, you'll find that you actually get better and better at it, right? And you start pattern recognition, you start understanding where that field is building, right? But I say, if you're really interested in doing it, start writing those checks.
Awesome. I would say provide the most fungible resources possible. So provide things that have flexible uses. You know, we have a software grant program at CultureAmp, but not everybody needs CultureAmp software. Don't tell my CRO I said that. But not everybody does. But you know, someone can use HR consulting, or someone can use a salesperson to talk about business development. And so a skill or money or time is more fungible than a concrete product. It doesn't mean you should never provide the product, but start from the basis of what's the most fungible thing I have to offer, so that the person that I'm looking to impact has maximum agency and control over how they use that resource.
I love that word, fungible. That's my new word for today. Know what your value add is. So this, write the damn check, absolutely. Many companies could write a check. What do we as a technology company bring? That's our differentiator. And then, so write the damn check. I'm borrowing that too. Bring your product. Bring your IP. You know, as the holder of much IP as an organisation, we can share that. IP is in our world. IP is something we can share without losing something. You know, the referral of our IP is actually making our brand stronger. And your people. So this idea that your people have skills that other organisations can benefit from. So and lots of organisations have got this. This is not innovative, but we have a 3-day-a-year paid volunteering scheme. And we say to our people, go volunteer in nonprofits. Use your skill that you have at Fujitsu with nonprofits. And we pay them to do that. And that's our way of trying to harness all of the types of assets that we have. And then the other piece is, I think, connecting. I think this is something we all do, perhaps as intrinsically in who we are. But we know that we live in an ecosystem. We don't live our lives in silos, neither does anybody else. How do we connect the pieces of puzzle, because we can only bring one part of that puzzle into a co-created solution that might say the money comes from here, the HR marketing expertise comes here, and the back-end IT comes from here. And I think seeing organisations as collaborators, even if we're commercially competitive, is one of the things that I'm really proud of us being able to do.
Yeah, and I think from an Atlassian perspective, I'm going to touch on what you said, Aubrey, that I think everyone would hate me for saying that not everybody needs our products, although we make them use it sometimes. Like it's if you're a software engineer, that's very funny. If you want, from our perspective, those relationships that we have with social impact partners is an investment that they're making in us as well to bring those exact things to them. Because if we're only giving them enough to satisfy what they've asked for, so that they can then go and ask someone else to, fill a gap that they've created because they've spent so much time on us, that's not viable. We wouldn't make that investment if we were making a an actual investment, and I say actual in the sense of like, if we were hoping to see a financial return on that, we'd be laughing them out of the room if they said, oh, we were only asking for just enough to ask you for money. We need to give them something. And like the Shark Tank, you need to be able to come with network, connection, leverage. How do you actually amplify the impact that they're having? And these are all very active things that sound very hard to do, but they are not. And if you think about social impact causes and a lot of the things that people that are driving that as investments, and that they're investing in you as well, seeing them as an opportunity to share your skill set so that they can do more, is a no-brainer. And I think communicating that up to your leadership and getting them involved and on board with that as well is actually a really key journey that we've taken a lot of folks on. Very lastly, that's one of the challenges that I see. What are the challenges that you all see in going out and actually having an impact? Whether you're a small company, big company, what's the biggest challenge that you think people are going to face leaving the room today?
This is something that's not really, it's not like sexy or interesting, but there's a lot of policy issues at play that are going to be very challenging for founders, challenging for investors, challenging for corporates. I'm speaking from the U.S. context. So we are actively engaged on the policy discussions. There's changes to who can enter the asset class to be an investor. There's changes around equity crowdfunding. There's changes around what venture capital looks like. Venture capital took a beating in the U.S. and it's rippling all over, right? So there's a significant downfall in capital. And so we're going to see this massive gap, and I'm concerned about the impact that's going to have on our founders, which is why that early stage, investment, that early stage support is going to be even much more critical. And then really staying attuned to those policy issues. Don't turn a blind eye to that. If that's not your bag, then find somebody who's weasels into that and really understands where the political winds are moving, because that's where the rules are made, and then that's where capital flows. So be very mindful of that. But I know it's going to be a challenging environment for us, at least in the next few years.
Policy nerds love that kind of stuff. So just find your policy nerd.
I love that. I would say focus and go deep with the partners who you're never going to get credit for working with. So I think that it's a lot of companies do what I call the spray and pray method of philanthropy. And not to say that small gifts are not important. I don't want to deride those. But it's the idea of like, well, my one employee gave, $5 to lung causes, and someone gave $8 to this and that. And I don't think that's bad. But I think organizations can have the most impact when they pick a narrow set of topics and then go deep on that. And then they identify those partners who are least likely to get the ecosystem support. So yes, go find the nonprofits without a marketing team and offer them yours. But I think that's really important. So I go back to at Culture Amp, I will tell you, it is not written into the mission of the foundation, but I run the team. So we really only consider nonprofits that benefit and are run by people of color. And that's because our foundation is focused on addressing generational disadvantage, and we believe colonialism and white supremacy is the greatest generational disadvantage that our society has. And so I just offer that we're intentionally doing it in that way. Now, whether the cause that you care about is medical or climate or social, all of those are important, and it takes all of us working on each of those problems, but pick something and do it really, really well with someone who might not get help if you don't give it.
We have a similar approach. It's probably not written anywhere.
Yeah, I don't know if I should put that on Twitter.
But we do say about our community partnership strategy that we don't fund intermediary organisations that serve communities. So we have a focus areas, so inclusion focus areas that are important to us as an organisation, and part of our strategy is that we work with organisations that are of the community themselves. So this idea about the lived experience being closest to helping find solutions. So our partnership strategy is specifically around that, along with two other things I think are challenges. So one is around trust building. So there's a big focus on show impact quickly. as a First Nations Australian, these issues have been brewing since 1770. Probably difficult to show intergenerational wealth exchange and self-determination in a 12-month annual report cycle. Just saying. Moving at the pace of trust and then recognising that that means you might have a slow burn and then an overnight success. What I forgot to mention before about Sherberg was it took 9 months of trust building before we opened the doors on the service centre, because we needed to make sure that the community was driving this. And it wasn't until we got to a tipping point when an auntie said, "Hey, bub," because she's my elder, she can call me that, although no one else would think of me as a small child. Is this for real? That was the question that she asked in front of lots of different community members. And I said, "Yes, auntie, it's for real." And she said, "You're going to come, you're going to provide us training, pay us while we're training, because blackfellas, we're overtrained, trained and underemployed, so please pay people when you're training them. Provide the equipment, provide the customers, and we own it and we run it and it's ours." I'm like, "Yep, that's it." And when she went, "Okay, I'm on board," the rest of the community went, "Okay, we're on board too." But we had to have that tipping point, and that took time to build trust to ask that question. So if you want to have impact, think about how close you can be to the lived experience. If it's not your lived experience, ask the person whose lived experience it is. And take the time to build the trust, because once that trust is there, then the momentum just grows so quickly.
Yeah. I'll add to that, and I think build on what you've all said, that you don't just have to show up and build that trust and let them own their story and their solutions, but you have to keep showing up. We've taken a really a change to the way that we do things, where we're not just showing up once, writing a check and walking away. We've tried to build, that relationship, that investment. But what we're now really aware of is that you have to show up this year and next year and the year after. And you can't just divert what you intended to give to someone this year to a new idea or a new thing that's kind of new, shiny thing, right? Like, we're entrepreneurs, we do shiny stuff. But we, with our targets, now have targets around new philanthropy. So we want that new shiny thing. We want to bring new money and new opportunity out. But at the same time, we're there and we're committed and we're building trust with and longer term relationships with things that take 2, 3, 5 years. And strangely, social impact teams don't get those 2, 3, 5 year relationships. They get $1 million this year, none next year. Right, and they build a program around having $1 million, and then next year they can't fund it. Right, so they're letting people go, they're bringing people on. They have a really inconsistent approach in how they deliver, which means that we're burning their trust, and then they're burning the trust that they built with the community they're trying to represent, and they have a really inconsistent way of delivering against it. So it's great that we're able to give money out, but we're creating additional systemic issues by focusing like that. That's my biggest challenge. Thank you all for contributing. I think we've only got like 5 minutes, so I'm not sure we're doing any questions, but yeah, thank you all for coming, and we're sticking around for a little bit. Thank you.